Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining late on Wednesday. It is Wednesday. My name is Gino Canessa. We're going to talk about FHIR subscriptions, server-driven workflows. Hopefully that is the correct session. If it's not, please let me know. I can pull up a different deck. Minutia-wise, it should be in Whova. There's also a link, aka.ms/GinoC/Dex, where you will find this and everything else I've presented over the past few years that's public. So feel free to peruse. I periodically pull up subscriptions from 2019 just to see how it's changed. It's kind of fun. Or if you can't sleep. Agenda, we have the obligatory About Me slide. Talk some about why we need subscriptions, why we need topic-based subscriptions. Do a brief technical overview, see how far into the weeds we want to get. Go through an example use case, and then talk about the latest and greatest changes that are going into STU 1.2 and FHIR 6, and hopefully some time for questions. So, about me, I am a software engineer at Microsoft. I'm in research in a group called Health Futures. Been doing FHIR since 2019, infrastructure, tooling, code gen, spec development, all kinds of fun stuff. DICOM before that, and contact info. If you're interested, Zulip is definitely the easiest to get me, chat.phir.org, most likely to get a reply the fastest. So why are we talking about subscriptions at all? And really we want to talk about FHIR and REST. FHIR is one of the real strengths of FHIR is how nice and restful and easy this is to work with. For people that aren't familiar, REST is actually an acronym, Representational State Transfer. That's pretty much aligned with the HTTP methods and things like that. So you have get, delete, put, post, and it's client-driven. So the client is the one making the request to the server. It's fantastic, it's stateless, it's cacheable, you have content delivery networks, all kinds of fun stuff like that. But there's a polling problem. And that's to say, if you want to know that something has changed as a client, all you can do is ask, and ask, and ask, and ask, and ask. And you get into this fun scenario where you have to say, like, the patient wants to know if they have a new medication or something like that, and I'm going to ask every couple hours, every day, every week. You know, if I only ask once a week, the medication might be sitting there for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days before the patient gets it. But if I'm asking every 10 minutes, the server is going to cut me off because I'm asking them every 10 minutes. And as you scale out to millions of patients, that's a problem. So what we want is the server to tell me when data changes. Simple, easy, thanks for coming. No, I'm just kidding. As we all know, anything that's easy to describe is going to be very painful to implement. Oh, there you go, I'd forgotten about that part. There. So, subscriptions should be easy. We are in a little bit of luck. I leave this in because subscriptions was actually added all the way back in DSU2, way in the start of FHIR. And back during that time when people were working on STU3, there were some use cases that didn't quite fit in the way subscriptions were working. And so one of those was split off into a project called FHIR that's primarily concerned with context synchronization in real time. The canonical use case there is like a radiologist who has a DICOM viewer and a radiology information system and a health information system and a transcription system. They need to all be synced on the same patient. So when you change the patient in one, you want to change pages in all of them. And that has to happen in real time and all that kind of stuff. So that's FHIR. Good stuff. Another one is CDS hooks, clinical decision support hooks. And that's for things when you're like a practitioner, you're in your workflow, and you're going to prescribe something, and you want to go run the drug interaction test and come back with something that tells you, is this okay to do? So it's this kind of closed loop system that you're doing in a workflow. Also fantastic stuff, also not what we're worried about here. So subscription stayed the way it was in STU3 and R4, and it was based on change set notifications. So basically you gave it a query, and the server was supposed to tell you anytime that set of results changed. And what happens is that works really well for some types of use cases, and it works not at all for others. And so there were lots of things that people could implement in this scenario, and then in this other scenario it was just like, no, it's just not supported. So back in 2019, right before I started, They said, push the big red button, let's do a redesign. The redesign was supposed to be for FHIR R5. People said, no, we need it in R4 series. So we made R4B. Very successful, as Ewout mentioned earlier in the week. Then people said, no, R4B is not good enough. We need it in R4. So we wrote a backport IG. And then we have R6 because we want some more changes. And we're syncing those back and forth, and it's a lot of fun. But the end result is fantastic in that we can use topic-based subscriptions in FHIR R4 and up. So with feature parity. So what am I talking about with topic-based subscriptions? Well, it's pub sub, web sub, whichever publication subscription service you prefer. We have reusable topics. So topics are defined canonically so that we can reuse them and hopefully get common support. You can base them on resource changes or events. So this is helping get that back catalog. Healthcare has existed prior to today. So we have a lot of existing things, and we want to make sure that we can transition smoothly between them. Servers can choose which topics they're going to implement. They advertise for it, and that lets them optimize it, right? We're not telling the server, here's an arbitrary query that hits 15 different resources and all these comparisons to find out if something changed. We're saying, hey, let me know when a patient checked in. Any EHR, any healthcare system has to know when a patient checked in. They have some way of telling that. And really this brings FHIR server-driven workflows. So there's 3 components to this system. The first one is a topic. So that's the thing that you're saying, hey, I'm going to define what I'm interested in, right? You might say, I want to know when there's a new patient resource created, or when an encounter changes from in progress to complete or finished, depending on which version of FHIR you're in. You might say an event. The V2 event catalog I refer to because it's pretty familiar to a lot of people. So you might say, I want an ADT AO3 transfer, ADT AO1, all these different things that you can just say, yeah, that's what I want. You also define the filters that you're going to let clients use. And that's to say, you might want to know about new encounters, but you want to tell patients that they can filter for just their encounters. Or you might want to say a practitioner can filter for theirs, or a care team. And so the server can really set up these things so that they can really optimize the things they support and let clients ask for exactly what they want. Next part down, subscriptions. So this is the stuff that handles the resource that links the topic to who wants it, right? At some point, someone has to know there is a person who is interested in getting notifications. Here is their endpoint URL. They want FHIR JSON because they don't like XML, because who likes XML? You need all this kind of stuff. You need someone to manage all of that. So that's all exists in the subscription. And then there's the notification, the actual thing that happens. Let me let you know. You can have 0 or more events. We have handshakes, all this kind of stuff we'll get into. So in R5, again, there's links in the deck. I'm not going to spend too much time, but I want to make sure they're all there for people who are looking up. So in R5, there's the subscription topic resource, the subscription resource that we changed a lot from R4. Notifications, we added a new bundle type. We have a subscription status resource for all of that meta information. Very nice, clean modeling. And then we have the backport IG. And so we can't, in R4B, we could still create the new resource, subscription topic, but we can't create a new resource in R4. R4 is published. So we have a basic resource in R4, and then we use these cross-version extensions, which you can hear more about tomorrow morning. Ewout Kramer is giving a talk, but we use that to represent it in R4. We have profiles on the subscription resource. There's a bunch of extensions you have to use because we weren't allowed to change that in anything in R4. So to add all these new functions, we had to put extensions on it. In R4B, again, we could add a subscription status, but we have to use parameters in R4, and we use a history bundle. And there's just another view. I learn different ways, people learn different ways. So you can see there's a topic, a subscription, and a notification. So what's actually in the topic? Well, we touched a little bit on it. There's the canonical, definitional, knowledge, resource, whatever you want to call it. These can be in implementation guides, so people publish them. Other guides start building on top of this. So in the US context, DaVinci, several of those IGs have subscription topics that they're starting to build in. Electronic case reporting has topics they're starting to build in, and so they can publish those as part of their packages, and then we can just refer to them by their canonical URLs. You have to define what those what's causing the notification. And so there's computable part and narrative part, the human readable text. You can describe these again as state changes, as FHIR interactions, as external events. We have query things versus FHIR path things, all this stuff. The idea is give people as many ways of looking at the definition as you can, because we don't know how the servers implement things. And so really a lot of people have to fall back to the human readable text, but you might be able to apply the FHIR path, or you might be able to apply queries or things like that. Again, the allowed filters, and then the shape. So you can also say what other resources might be included with the notifications. So when you send me a new encounter notification, also please send me the patient record and maybe the location record. And if it's discharge, maybe you can send me the diagnosis or any observations that were made. It's a may, because servers have discretion here. You may not have authorization to see something. The server might decide it's too costly to include them at the time, different things like that. So clients can ask for them, but servers may or may not include them. Always code defensively. So just some examples. A patient administration one, encounter resource, looking for in progress, filters, things to include, an explanation of benefit, EOB resource, create interaction, some different filters there. Hopefully we're deciding that you can define whatever you want. And then, this is why we'll go through these slides pretty quickly. This is just kind of breaking out some of the actual elements that are there. So we can see we have a FHIR path criteria. I'll show up here, yeah. So we have a FHIR path criteria where the previous resource was empty, or there was a previous, a previous status that was not in progress, and now the current status is in progress. So we define a couple of variables for previous status and current status, and that lets us know state changes, because otherwise you don't know. When you just do a post on a server, there's no inherent mechanism for state changes, and so the FHIR path things have that. Same thing with query criteria, it's saying the exact same thing. If you had a search on encounter, status not in progress, status equals in progress, they both have to be true, and then if it's a create, it passes. So lots of ways of defining things. And there's the equivalent event trigger. That's a V2 83A01. Again, for people who have V2 systems, that's useful to have for reference. We're going to skip over some of those because they're there in case you want to look for more info. All right, so subscription, what is it? This is a regular resource, a domain resource. And like I said, it's linking that topic to a client, to a request, to a receiver. It can be client managed, or it can be server managed. I'll dig into that more here in a minute. The big things are things like endpoint information, right? You need to know, are you sending REST? Are you sending via WebSockets? Are you sending via email? All those types of things. You need the endpoint, the domain name, the URL, the FHIR version, all those kinds of things. And again, someone has to be responsible for this, because as we all know, an SSL cert expires, a domain name changes. All these kinds of things happen, and so somewhere in the workflow, someone has to be paying attention to that. And then it also defines the actual filters, because this is the thing that says you could filter on patient ID, and I'm saying, well, I'm patient 123, so send me notifications for patient 123. So it's that instantiation of the filters. All right, so client managed versus server managed. And I use the word server. It doesn't have to actually be the server. But this is something that's come up over the years several times. We don't actually care who is managing the subscription resource. So if you have a for instance, pure FHIR server, and you're saying clients can just ask, perfect, client managed. The same client is the receiver. They ask for notifications that go to themselves, and they are responsible for changing it. So they have to check to see if it's in error state. They have to update it if their URL changes, all that kind of stuff. In the server managed side, we're saying there's a receiver, and someone else is managing it. Maybe it's the server, the administrators at the hospital. Maybe it's a national coordinator or an HIE or whatever saying, I know where these people are and I know what notifications they want, so I'm going to tell these different providers where to send notifications. Maybe they're just sending notifications to me and I'm rerouting them and distributing them. All those things are possible. But whoever that managing organization is on the hook for tracking those things, for checking the error state, for maintenance. So the end goal there, someone has to do it. If you find a way to do all this without someone managing it, please let me know, because that sounds magical and I would love to have access to it. All right, so what else is in the subscription? We have the channel types. This is just methods of communication. In FHIR, generally, we follow the 80-20 rule, so we try to define things in the core spec that 80% of people will use. So we've predefined REST hook, overwhelmingly the most common. We have WebSocket, which is useful like in closed EHR contexts. Email, which was fought for hard by someone in this room, specifically for public health use cases, and I agree with it. But when you talk to a small jurisdiction like a county, a rural county out in the middle of nowhere, they don't have a FHIR server. They don't have a web server. But they can have an email address. And so you still need to send their health department an ECR, an electronic case reporting notification or something like that. But where are you sending it to? Send it to them in email. And then FHIR messaging, for people who are in that paradigm, we wanted to make sure it works. If you don't know what FHIR messaging is, don't ask. No, I'm just kidding. You can ask, but it's for very specific things, and yes. That said, we did leave it extensible, and that's to say, just because we've predefined the 80%, we want to make sure that we can still work with the other 20%. So in the reference servers that I maintain, for instance, I made a Zulip notification type, and it's cool. It sends me private messages on chat.phir.org telling me that something happened, so I can click through and look at them. You can do message queues, Kafka, RabbitMQ, whatever you prefer. And yes, even fax. Graham Grieve, who could not be here this week, he's on walkabout right now. But that was one of the first things he had to do, because of course it's one of the first things anyone has to do is say, we actually have to send notifications via fax, and you can define that channel, and it does work. So what do we send via these channels? Well, we have 3 payload types. And I like the automotive reference because I think it's easier to picture. So we start on the top with pings, right? So we're just telling you something happened. So they're super lightweight. There's almost no chance of PHI, almost. It's going to require the client to come back and query. So they know something happened. We have some operations that we've defined the server can implement if they want, so they can ask specifically what the events were, things like that. Or they're going to say, hey, there was some sort of encounter notification, so I'm going to go and ask the server for all the last encounters in the last 30 days, whatever those queries are. But you can let a client know something without worrying about transferring things. I'm actually going to jump to the bottom, because it makes more sense, to say there's the full resource. That's the bus, right? Everyone on board, let's go. And the idea there is saying, hey, here is the full resources. I'm in a coordinated scenario, like business to business, payers, providers, things like that are common. I'm going over a secure channel. I have certificate pinning and all this fantastic stuff. And I don't want you to come back and ask me anything. I want to give you a payload and be done with it. So that's often full resource. And then we have the in-between, ID only. So that's saying not just there was something on an encounter, but there's something you should look at in encounter ABC. So now, instead of doing a query, the client can come and do a read. So it's much cheaper for the server, because they knew that at the time they generated the notification, but it still requires the client to come and authenticate before they can actually access the resource. This is also nice because, again, there's very little in the way of PHI that's possible. There's always leakage, and I'll talk about that more later. But overall, this is for things like I want to convert my REST hook into a push notification for a cell phone. Okay, probably don't send full resources through some arbitrary service that's converting data into push notifications. Probably use something like ID only so that the app on the phone can request. This is just a different view showing specifically the differences. So we can see when we start with ping, notification gets the ID, step 1. Step 2, the client has to query. Step 3, the client gets their data. In ID only, you get the same notification, but it has the IDs, so we can retrieve data, one fewer step. And in full resource, it's all in step 1, that it has everything in it. And of course, then we figure out we need to add something else. So this is new. This is going into R6 for the next ballot candidate, and it's in the ballot reconciliation of the backport implementation guide for 1.2 that's going to be published soon, which is to say when we can finish applying all the changes. But sometimes none of those things that we just talked about are appropriate. Sometimes you want to tell someone, here is the query you want to run. So for example, if you are doing a referral, in an ideal world, I send you a referral, and tomorrow you check in the patient, and everything's current because this happened tomorrow. I think we're all aware of the state of healthcare, so instead I send you a referral, and 6 months from now you will get to seeing that patient. Okay, well, do I really want to send you the medications today if you're going to see the patient 6 months from now? Do I want to send you allergies? I don't know. They might have changed. So what I want to do is tell you, here's how you get that information, and then you can come ask me for it. So that's one use case. There's also the cases of complicated or choice or non-standard areas. So things like insurance coverage queries. They're not really standardized yet. And so if you want to be able to notify someone about that, just telling them, pull up this coverage resource probably isn't going to help. You need to give them this query that has all these different inclusions and criteria and whatever else. Optionality between resources. Everything's an observation. So observation is almost always one of the choices, but it might be an observation or a diagnostic report or a questionnaire response. Sometimes you have the same data in multiple formats. Some servers might support one, the other, both, and so you can send them queries so that they know how to ask that question. It's also relevant when you don't know what the client needs. So maybe there's a national jurisdiction managing your referrals, and so you send all the information for every referral through, but the person who's actually processing the referral says, well, I'm physiotherapy, I only need these 3 resources. So the queries come with different code systems so that you can identify what they're asking about. And then you can say, okay, yeah, for physiotherapy, I don't need their medications list or their allergies because I don't care. I'm just doing PT. So that way the receiver can choose and get that minimum information so we're not just widely sharing PHI we don't have to share. So a couple examples, same thing, and I'll go over these relatively quickly just in the interest of time. But following the same examples we were talking, no, they're not the same. They're slightly different examples. But a patient administration as a consumer, we were talking about that, the encounter notifications earlier. I'm going to ask for a REST hook notification based on my patient ID. So I have a filter that's instantiated just to me. I want it ID only because I know that this is going to get translated into a push notification. And I want JSON because JSON is better than XML. Another one in internal, like an internal EHR scenario, medication dispensed. So we want something on a WebSocket because it's running locally inside the hospital. We might filter on location because I'm only interested in patients in my ward. And I can send the full resources so that I don't have to round trip a bunch. But I still want JSON. So again, this is just going through kind of the breakout of what some of those actual elements look like. Shouldn't be too surprising, but if anyone has questions, please do feel free to ask. All right, so notifications, what do you get? You always get a bundle. And that just makes life easier because then we're more consistent. So even if there's only one resource or even 0 resources, we still know exactly what to send. In R4 and R4B, we chose the history bundle. We could have a whole nother talk about that. It's a very common question. Needless to say, it is now etched in stone and we're not going to change it. So it's a lot of fun. Consensus building. In R5 and R6, I should add that, there is a subscription notification bundle that gives you a little more hinting and loosens some of the rules that we were still fighting against. It always has status information. So this is that subscription status resource or a parameters that does the same thing in R4. And it has to be the first thing in the bundle. So it's like a message header, like a document header, like any of these types of things, that it's the header information, so it has to come first. And then there's the payload. You might have an empty because you asked for an empty subscription, so there's no additional resources. You might have just IDs, or you might have full resources, you might have inclusions, all those different things. For this slide, this is just some architectural notes. Again, for me, it's always useful when I'm describing this to talk about everything kind of being all in one system so that we note that's not actually required. Often that's not actually desired. It's just easier to conceptualize. So within the subscription server, we can talk about this all in one. And that's, the system has all the logic. It sends in whatever protocols you support. It's perfect, it's happy, it's a monolith, and it gets upgraded every couple of years. Fantastic. Please do. Second option, protocol relay. Also fantastic. You say, my server only knows about maybe a message queue. Maybe, every cloud provider, Microsoft included, has their own internal cloud format and protocol and data types and all those things. So maybe my server can only do that, and then I have some other server that's receiving those and making them into REST hooks and messages and everything else. Maybe I have a message queue, maybe I am using REST hooks and something else is doing it. Perfect, please do. Or maybe I have a logic server. So essentially I say, okay, my server is just going to send every single change that happens to this other destination. That other destination is the one actually keeping track of subscriptions. It's doing the filtering, it's doing the notifications, maybe it's using another protocol relay down the stack. All these things are possible. We're trying to define this infrastructure piece and still be flexible on the implementation piece. So a use case, still enough time. This is just for an example, how this is actually used. So for me, one of the easy ones is care team notifications. If we all know, care is complicated and involves a lot of people. And they really need to know what care is or is not happening. And the is not is also important there. If you refer someone for a service and they never get it, that's also something you need to know about. And that's easy to forget about. So we're back to the polling problem, right? We're back to saying, I think my patient, I referred my patient for X. I need to go and check, maybe daily, maybe nightly, maybe weekly. Hey, did they ever get that scan done? Did they ever get that medication? Did they ever get that social service? I just need to ask. But it's worse. And it's worse because now we're crossing organizational boundaries. I'm not just asking in my department or in my hospital. I have to ask the HVAC system if they've gone and done mold mitigation at house, this external company. I have to go ask a pharmacy if they've actually dispensed a medication if the patient ever picked it up. And even worse than that, it's a person doing it, right? We all talk about provider burnout, and this is one of those things I hear about frequently, is saying, I only know if something happened to my patient if I pull up their record. And so I'm sitting there at night, in my pajama time when I'm doing my, filling out all my charts. I also have to go and pull up patient records just to find out if anything changed. That's terrible. We can do better. So what kinds of things can we do? Well, we can say, let's define some topics. We can say things like patient needs service, patient scheduled, completed, did not complete service, new lab, new prescription, all these types of things. And then we can make notifications to the care team. The people receiving those notifications can put them into things like Teams or whatever they're using. You can put them, attach them to their chart. You can send them a text message if it's urgent, but the server can determine how to actually let the provider know that. You can also start then using independent apps. You can say a provider has a smart app using Smart App Launch that's receiving these notifications so that they can be receiving info on their patients. For reference on these things, we do have some active work in Argonaut talking about things like how can we define topics in the US core context and things like that. So I encourage to look into those. It's not running yet. I don't remember when it starts off the top of my head though. But what does that get us? Well, it gets us improved care, right? There's less of a chance of missing data. I'll use the example, my father had been diagnosed with cancer about a year ago, and he was in the ER 3 times before I called his oncologist to say, hey, we've been in the hospital 3 times and haven't heard from you. Is everything okay? And the hospital was 2 buildings from his office, and he said, I never heard about it. I'll be there in 5 minutes. And he walked over. And we had been in the ER 3 times before we did that, and we had to let him know. But this way, you can know about patient events sooner. You can get cross-organizational updates. Whew, that's painful. You know, once you start dealing with security and all these different things, well, now we have these things that can sit next to where you're getting data, and it doesn't impact, you know, the internals of your system. Reduces burden, and just overall, information is faster, more reliable. We have enough time, and I should have opened this before. So we do have a reference implementation for a lot of this stuff on GitHub. It's an in-memory FHIR server and UI. It's hosted on Azure. Thank you, Microsoft. And it is available as a .NET tool. That's all there. We are actually working on getting this into the FHIR community process. And I think we just passed the last hurdle, and we're trying to figure out how to actually move it. And then we will also add it to the FHIR Foundry so that you can spin these up yourself if you are interested. Oops. Hi, computer. Okay, computer. We'll do this. I definitely had this all pulled up before anyone got here. So you can see this is just the web UI for subscriptions. In this case, we can see we have, is that big enough? I can do one more. We'll do one more. FHIR R4, FHIR R4B, and FHIR R5. So this is supporting all 3 versions. It has, you know, some example patient and subscriptions and things like that. And one of the most important things is there's a detailed tour available here. And so this lets you go through step by step and say, oh, I'm choosing a topic with all the description about what that is, and it lets you know where you're railroaded. In this case, since we're trying to do something that's closed loop and show you the notifications, there are a lot of choices that you can't actually make. The server does support kind of arbitrary subscriptions, up to a point, with an asterisk as always, but you can just submit them yourself and use this to compare or run it locally and do the same thing. But in this case, we want to use the only topic we're allowed to use. You can see we can pick from all these different things that the server supports, but the only one that's enabled is REST hook because we need the demo to work, and the demo can only see REST hook. Heartbeats, these are the kinds of things that some of these quality of life things. When you create a subscription, you can do a handshake to make sure that the other side actually exists and is listening. And then you can also say, for instance, you should send me a message every 120 seconds, every few minutes, you know, every 10 minutes, every day, whatever it is, so that the client can know, hey, I haven't heard from you in 3 days, probably something's wrong. And that's one of those kind of quality of life things that needed the redesign. MIME type, JSON, we do let you pick XML. It should judge you for it. And then the content level. Just you. We could just call it Rick. Empty, ID only, full resource. We can pick what we want there because that we're flexible. Patient example, there's a preloaded hard-coded patient there so that we actually get notifications. We create the subscription. Then we can go through and actually see the subscription if we want. Maybe. Okay. Well, we'll get back to that in a second. You can see it actually got the handshake. We can go see the notification bundle that it sent for the handshake. Ooh, why is that in light mode? There we go, dark mode. And that way we can see, here is the bundle, there's the profile, all these things. Oops. Boop, boop. Select the filters, there's the, oops. Waiting for handshake, I need to do a new one. Next, there we go. The topic we're using is set for encounters. So we need to have a patient, and in this case, again, we're just gonna post an encounter. You can go look at it there, all that kind of stuff. There's the actual URL if you're just using a FHIR client and wanted to pull it, or Postman, or whatever. And then you can see, oh, the subscription has triggered one notification. We can go look at the notifications that we sent, and this is the kind of stuff. This doesn't work great in full screen. There we go. So we can see there's a subscription with a topic, with an event number, when it was received, the status at generation, the focus resource, additional context, all these different things. And this is kind of the stuff that I think belongs in a reference server so that you can debug as you're building your own stuff. And then clean up, because we are nice people who clean up after ourselves. Awesome. Boop. So where are we today? As I mentioned earlier, we are in a process called ballot reconciliation for the backport IG. For people not familiar with the HL7 processes, people file change requests through Jira ticketing system. Probably most people have at least heard of Jira in a comedic sense, if nothing else. But people file change requests, work groups vote on those, see what we actually want to change. We make changes to the specification, and then we have to go through a balloting process. And that's where we say, here are all the changes we've made since the last version. Give us feedback, please. Once we go through that process, people file more Jira tickets. And then we get into reconciliation, where we have to apply all of them. We've applied most of them from the last ballot, but not all of them yet. So once that's done, we will then publish and have the new version out. We're also working on FHIR R6. The next 4-comment ballot for FHIR R6 starts in September. Same thing, that's the next big version of FHIR core specification. We're gonna go through many ballots on this, and so we just have different pieces. And the subscription stuff, we're trying to make sure it's all ready for the next comment one, which happens in September. So what does it have? Well, it has that notified pull that I talked about here. That we talked about earlier, sending queries instead of the resources or IDs. We've added authorization hinting. And so this is so you can say in a notification, here is, for instance, an access code, and that code has to be presented during token exchange, and then I can scope you to exactly this resource that I want you to have. It's particularly useful in the context of sending queries, because we're essentially asking you to come access our system and run queries. And so you might want to have that additional code so that you can say, those are also the only queries you can run when you authenticate. Some additions to event tagging. That's one of the big ones that I'm really happy with. We've collapsed the resource change and event parts of the subscription topic, the triggers. And then we made sure that flows all the way down into the notifications. And this is really important, like I was talking about earlier, in the context of things like US Core. Because many of the authors have said they want to say, I want US Core notifications. And that's fantastic, but then when I get a notification as a patient, all I know is something happened. And that's not really useful. So now we can say, yes, something happened, and that something was a new encounter was completed. Okay, that's much more useful. I think those are the biggest things that are in there. Questions, links. So here, again, you can pull this up in Whova, but there's the Dex. There's a Zulip channel for subscriptions. You can ask there. You can ask on Implementers channel if you're on chat.phir.org. You can ask on the FHIR infrastructure workgroup. That's who owns this type of infrastructure work, is the FHIR infrastructure workgroup. I, in full disclosure, happen to be a co-chair right now. There's a link to the subscription backport implementation guide. There are resource links for the different resources, and the link for the reference implementation. And so with that, I think we can open it up for questions for a few minutes. I actually had more time left than I thought, but I don't know where the microphone went. I can repeat questions. We're fine. All right, I'll repeat questions. Yes?
Yeah, I have a few questions because, in fact, when we start our Singapore National Health CSG program 2 years ago, in fact, I know that
maybe I will get the microphone. Yes, let me get the microphone out after all if you're going to ask a few questions. Oh, Brian's got it. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. We just need to make sure we use the mics for the recording.
So if because look at the subscription, the resource, few things like, I mean, could be still quite a number of gaps because in terms like what we implement for now, like one, for example, now take example of the content. Currently the content is only for empty, ID, or full resource, right?
Yes.
So we do have some requirements, for example, like, we're using care plan. The one EMR submit the care plan to our central repository, but this care plan also be shared to the few downstream system. But some system we want to share as the full care plan resource. But some system we only share the certain elements. I mean, because this is based on the so-called data sharing agreements. So maybe some we not supposed to share the whole health plan information, only the summary information. So these are the and I look at the code currently is required, which means I cannot create extensible. Say I want to say ID resource, or maybe say summary resource, right? So
yeah, definitely we can. I would ask if you can file a JIRA ticket for that, or reach out to me and I can walk through that. Essentially, to make sure I have the question right, there's cases where they want to send the summary version of the resource instead of the full resource. For right now, if you wanted to use the existing system with no changes.
But this topic, I think it would be more like I think me for myself, and also get my guys also will be maybe participate in this. The refinement, because the other key issue I think look at the gap what we have probably the subscription resource requires some fundamental some structure change because it's some elements should put into so-called delivery channel.
I'm sorry, for the what?
For example, you deliver by the so-called channel type, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes you web or even maybe the RESTful hook. Then also, but some also require because we have some requirements, for example, once we receive the message, we need to push it down to multiple systems, maybe 20, 30 systems. But there's also requirements, the downstream system requires pause the queue.
Yes.
Because during maintenance, say, okay, maybe for tonight, 10 p.m. to tomorrow, 2 a.m., don't send me message, just hold in the queue. So how do we handle this kind of situation?
So having heard about this request for 5 seconds, I will guess. Don't hold me to it. Let me back up for a second. So we've definitely added more in R6. Each version we iterate and learn more. And so there's definitely more options about things like in R4 and earlier we had HTTP headers as an option in the subscription, and we split those out into generic key value pairs so that we can provide more information to servers and things like that. So in this case, there should be a subscription status that a client could set, and I have to think because there's active, and so a client could request that it's paused. And we actually went and we defined an operation for resending events. So we could use that in currently defined infrastructure. Probably we would want to make something slightly more detailed than that to do it. But I would be happy to coordinate with it. And we need to bring, a lot of these things have to go through, and that's why I was saying about filing tickets and things. We have to make sure we go through the HL7 consensus process. But for reference, things like the notified pull, the sending queries, That work came out of a similar type of scenario. The NICTIS group out of the Netherlands has been working on their national workflow stuff, and we have tried to align so that we have all the features they need that they've defined.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure we're not replicating things, that we have too many ways of doing something.
Yeah.
But we do want to make sure that we're covering the use cases. So definitely, I want to follow up.
And also maybe just one last question. I have a lot of questions, but I will pop in the
no
participate in the working group.
Yes.
But another question, because for example, for the downstream sending the data, because one, of course, the most important requirements is more like you need to provide a message sequence ID.
Yes.
Because this is for downstream system to sequencing control.
Yes.
For example, like, I'm guaranteed, for example, this message, I'm sending message in my order.
Yep.
But somehow when downstream receive may not be out of order.
Yes.
So how do I know, for example, the downstream know this message should come first, I should do a resequencing. So for example, like in the current how do we handle in our design? What do we do, like the payload, in fact, we're using called parameter resource, the payload. So which means we have two parameters. First parameter is the sequence ID.
Yes.
The second parameter is the full resource payload.
Yes. So in the subscription status, when we're talking about the events, we do have that sequence number.
Yeah.
And so that way you do know that the order mattered. Yeah. And we have a lot of descriptive text in the guides, I'll just refer to that collectively, saying if you're doing something like a reliable message queue, you can ignore all of that. Because if you're using a reliable guaranteed delivery message queue, you don't need to care about the order. You don't need to care about the sequencing, because they can just pick up what they pick up and it's guaranteed to be in order. If you don't, then that's actually why we added the 64-bit integer type into FHIR. That was due to us, saying we need to be able to send these sequences, and these numbers are going to exceed 32-bit. And so we do have that sequence number, and it is attached to every notification.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. Oh, we'll get the mic to you here in a second. Yes, Ken.
Yes. Do you know if any work has been done to formalize how you could translate a CDS hooks response to a topic subscription notification?
Sorry, you were going through a tunnel and no, I'm just kidding.
So, you know, like
yes.
to formalize what the topic URL, what the focus resource would be for each of the defined CDS hooks?
It has not come up before.
It just feels like a natural fit.
It does, and this is one of the funny things I will just comment overall. That chart I show about how everything diverged, we've been trying to reconverge. I've been more active in Firecast side than the CDS hook side, but Firecast said, hey, in addition to context, we actually need content synchronization. And so there's a lot of things that we're trying to figure out. You know, all these things that we split apart at one point, turns out they aren't actually that different. But in a lot of cases, we have normative specifications now that are in production, and so we just try to figure out how to align as best we can. So in this case, I think that is another opportunity, and is probably worth, if you wouldn't mind filing a JIRA ticket, you can ask, and then that'll trigger the start of a work stream. Yes?
So I have a couple of questions.
Of course.
One, in your talk for subscription channel type,
yes.
You mentioned two things that need clarification. FHIR message
yes.
versus a broker message. You know, there's a message and
yes.
FHIR. What's the difference?
So FHIR messaging is a transport protocol that's defined by FHIR. And it's used in situations where, for instance, you don't have reliable connectivity. So in a normal RESTful FHIR mechanism, you're saying, yeah, I'm a client, I'm a server, I'm talking back and forth, it's great. But maybe I'm in a very remote area and I only have an hour of internet connectivity a day. Okay, in that case, what I actually do is I send a bunch of messages to the server saying, hey, here are all of my different queries and all of my different put operations and all of my gets and all this different stuff, and it's just a different paradigm of using FHIR. And so it uses a message bundle, there's a message header, and all kinds of coded information and requirements that are based on that. And so that's the FHIR messaging. When we talk about messaging otherwise, and I love all these overloaded terms, but in that case I'm talking about like a message queue, Kafka, RabbitMQ, MSMQ, whatever it is. And those are things that provide reliable delivery of some piece of information. And so to me those are, yeah, I put something in the queue and I'm guaranteed that that will be delivered to the client at some point and I can wash my hands of it.
Yeah. And a FHIR server has to support both, or
No. Most things in FHIR are optional. There are very, very, very few things that we say are actually required. For instance, you have to support looking things up by ID. Yes, you have to. You actually have to do that. But other than that, almost anything is optional. And so the biggest things for us are things like what we define and what we don't. So in the case of like the channel types, there are a lot of message queues, and everyone is very particular about why theirs is the best. And so we didn't want to get in the business of saying, well, here's all the parameters you need for Kafka, and here's all the parameters you need for MQ, and here's all the parameters you need for RabbitMQ. Will never be done. And so we said, okay, here's an extensible method for how you can define whatever channel you need. Here is a place where you can put all the parameters you need. Have fun. And then to make sure it works, that's why I did like the Zulip channel type, is because exactly that. I need to find out like who's the user you're trying to send it to, what's the destination server URL, all these different things. And so I kind of serve as the experiment for making sure that we can do those things.
Okay. And my second question is that I think this name is quite confusing, notified pull.
Yes.
Because the way you're describing it is that the server is doing that, but the pull normally is used for the client or the consumer.
And that's what it's happening. So it's essentially the server telling the client, I'm notifying you that you can do a pull. Okay. And so then at some point you're going to authenticate and do the pull. I don't know when, but I'm just notifying you that you should do a pull.
And that's different than the other previous way of ID only, or?
Yes. In all those cases, I'm telling you, here's an ID, here's a resource, or here's just something happened and you have to figure out what to do. In this case, I'm specifically sending you queries.
Okay.
And like I said, this came out of alignment work with the Netherlands, where they're saying for referrals, the server says, here are the 15, 20 types of data that you need for referrals, and then the client can pick and choose which ones they actually need to perform their service.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Oh, there we go. We're end at 45, right? I think? Yeah, we have time. If not, we'll keep talking during social.
So server-managed subscription.
I'm sorry.
When you have the server-managed subscription
Yes.
and the list of topic available for the subscription, do you have it across all your product offering? Like if I query the health data services with the capability statement for subscription R4, I should be seeing the same list of topic available for OSS version?
It is optional. So it's the same type of thing. There are servers who will only implement client-managed subscriptions. There are servers that will only implement server-managed. And there are servers that will implement both, and obviously servers that will implement neither. So in the case of, for instance, a large EMR, they're probably not going to do client arbitrary subscriptions, at least not for a few decades. Just because for them to map into the FHIR model, you know, their data tables, they're a facade server, and they're trying to figure out how to map all those things. It's unlikely. They're probably going to have a set that they build in and optimize, and then they're just going to offer those. And so in their case, that makes sense. When you talk about a generic server, a reference server, some of these other things, hey, Wild West, do whatever you'd like. You know, here's how you re-index the database to make sure that it's performant, you know, all those kinds of things. And so there's a lot of different use cases, and yeah, we just have discovery for what's supported.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yes. Sorry, we will continue this not recorded, but I was actually supposed to end almost 10 minutes ago, so thank you.